The Sasanian period was a high point for luxurious life in antiquity. From feasting to hunting, playing musical instruments, to playing chess and polo. Sasanian kings had a special interest in depicting their glorious moments in silver dishes as well as rock reliefs.
The image of two animals facing one another is a special feature of Sasanian art. Although this textile you see here was discovered in Egypt, it actually belongs to Sasanian Iran. Here you can see the mythical animals facing each other as well as peacocks. A lot of similar textiles were taken to Europe, and they undoubtedly had an effect on Byzantine textiles.
The influence of Sasanian motifs can be seen on the external wall of the 12th century AD church of Saint-Étienne in Beauvais, France, and on the textiles from Italy, Spain, and even remote places in the Far East, such as Japan. The reign of Sasanians is distinguished by their numerous encounters with Rome, followed by Byzantium. Various wars between these two powers exhausted both sides and made them vulnerable to a new rising force.
By the middle of the 7th century, the Sasanian Empire had been weakened considerably because of wars with Byzantium, internal corruption, high taxation, the caste system had worried the people, so they were ready to accept a new revolution, the coming of Islam and Islamic troops into the Fertile Crescent and into Iran.
See unity, utter unity, no unity. In this is to be summarized the trunk and branches of the tree of faith.
Islam brought a revelation which, like a rain, poured upon the soil of the soul of the Iranian people, who, because of many factors, including the rise of Manichaeism and Mazdakism during the Sassanid period and many social and religious and political events, were ready for the reception of this new message. The Iranians created a very major civilization before the rise of Islam. But the intellectual aspect of Persian civilization flowered with the coming of Islam.
To a people and a religion open to the world for novel ideas, the Iranians brought a unique gift, the experiences of an ancient and well-established civilization which the Arab rulers eagerly incorporated, including the ways to govern, to collect taxes, and to establish monumental architecture and art. The Bam Citadel in southeastern Iran is the largest and oldest mud brick city in the world. Here, before the devastating 2003 earthquake, distinct sectors were noticeable that could give us a relatively clear picture as to how the early Islamic cities in Iran might have looked. It consisted of the residential quarter that included a hypo-style mosque without a dome and a long bazaar, all enclosed by the main rampart. Then there was the governor's quarters on the hill, enclosed by another wall. A brilliant contribution of Iranian engineers was the development of the dome. As can be seen at the remains of the Ardashir Palace near Firuzabad, the inventive Iranian engineers had solved the question of putting a round dome on a square base by inventing squinches. Thus, in the Islamic period, the use of domes in the building of mosques started in Iran and spread to the whole Islamic world. Prophet Muhammad's decree for both men and women to learn and acquire knowledge from cradle to the grave encouraged Muslims to pursue learning. From the 9th century onwards, many Iranian Muslims became prominent figures in medicine and other disciplines. The greatest of these figures were Razi and Avicenna. Razi, known as Rhazes in the West, is also credited with the isolation of alcohol and its use in medicine as an antiseptic. Razi was the first physician to write a treatise on pediatrics. This is the resting place of Avicenna. A 1,000 years ago, Avicenna was one of the world's leading figures in philosophy, medicine, and pharmacology. His medical treatises, known as Canon, was a basic text at Oxford and Montpellier as late as the 17th century.
Die europäische Wissenschaft.
Since in those times the Church had banned research and studies, science was under great pressure in Europe. When the achievements of Islamic scholars in various sciences reached Europe through translated books from Spain, Sicily, or by students in Cordoba, then science began to progress here. Therefore, Islamic scholars were the purveyors of science in Europe.
Blühte eigentlich überhaupt erst die Wissenschaft hier auf.
In mathematics, Khwarazmi, from whence we get the word logarithm and algorithm, introduced algebra to Europe, as well as the decimal system of numerals instead of Roman numerals. While Omar Khayyam classified the forms of cubic equations, and Biruni did pioneering works in geography and empirical physics. Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century Arab philosopher of history, has thus recapitulated this development.
Most Muslim scholars, both in religious and intellectual sciences, were Persians. Thus, the truth of the statement of the Prophet becomes apparent. If learning was suspended at the highest parts of heaven, the Persians would attain it.
The Iranians played a major role in the development of Islamic civilization, yet they preserved much of their cultural heritage, including the Persian language. As a result, by the second half of the 9th century, a number of local dynasties that emerged in the eastern part of Iran, mainly in the Khorasan region, became the proponents of Persian poetry and literature. This trend continued even when the Seljuks, a large nomadic clan of Turkic origin, pushed through Iran in the 11th century. They were eventually transformed into the rulers of a centralized state under the influence of Iranian administrative institutions already in place.
All the politics, financial and administrative institutions had been created by the able officers, clergy and bureaucracy of Iranians. The top model of this was Nizam al-Mulk. His Siyasetname became almost a constitution for centuries for Turks and other Islamic peoples.
2 centuries before the first European university was founded at Bologna, Nizam al-Mulk for the first time established universities with a unique campus system at Nishapur, Isfahan and other major cities.
They gave rewards to people, to the students who did very well and achieved a certain degree, such that they gave them robes of honor and even talisman caps. And I think that it's fairly generally agreed that this is the origin of the cap and gown which you wear in Western universities when you get degrees, when you finish your course of study, that it goes back for, well, almost 1,000 years to the East.
Persian poetry is unique in the world for its depth, richness and creativity, and there is an intimate mingling of Persian mysticism and Persian literature.
The love for poetry is extraordinary, and there is no other country in the world that I know of which would have the same love for literature.
The greatest monument of Persian epic poetry is Ferdowsi's masterpiece, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, comparable to Homer's Iliad. 1,000 years after its creation, the Shahnameh is still easily understood by the Persian-speaking general public.
When I was young, and I was a classics major at the time, I loved Homer, I went to a museum and I saw the illuminations from the Shahnameh and decided any text that generated such gorgeous illuminations had to be read in the middle, which is why I've given my life to reading the Shahnameh.
Sophistication and sublimity finds no limit in the Iranian miniature paintings, which usually adorn the dazzling manuscripts of Iranian poetry.
When one reads a page or two of Nizami's, he immediately feels an inclination for painting, since Nizami had an extraordinary talent for storytelling and imagination. In his works, color, movement and story are all visualized.
In fact, in all 4 essential features of the art of the book, calligraphy, bookbinding, illumination and illustration, the Iranian artists reached the peak of perfection.
In the art of the books, there's a very precise construction in the beginning, you see. And in the ornamentation, you have a very solid preparation of a geometrical design.
Selection of the style of calligraphy and the type of pen itself for each text was an art in itself. Another interesting art was Iranian bookbinding that was copied even in Europe.
Certain Renaissance Italian bookbinding done in Venice was in fact copied from the method prevalent in Iran. And it's even possible to say that the bookbinder himself was from the city of Tabriz in Iran. This is one of the most exquisite methods in the West up to the present day.
Persian mystical poetry reached its pinnacle in the works of Jalaluddin Rumi. Rumi's considerable intellectual and poetic skills infused his poetry with delight, ecstasy, and spiritual zest. His greatest work is known as the Masnavi.
He was a person who was a great scholar. I mean, almost all the streams of Islamic thought before him flow into the Masnavi, but transformed mystically. Maulana Jalaluddin was also given by God the incredible gift of appreciating every form of beauty as the beauty of God. The famous hadith of the Prophet, ﷺ, Allahu Jamilun yuhibbu jamal, that is, God is beautiful and He loves beauty, marks the whole being of Jalaluddin.
When we think of the most popular moralist in Persian literature, Sa'di comes to mind. He writes, "The sons of Adam are the limbs of one body, created of one essence. When time pained one limb, the others can find no peace. Thou, who hast no sympathy for the troubles of others, art unworthy of the name human." From India to the Balkans, the poetry of Hafez, the story of love, beauty, and unselfishness, enjoyed great popularity.
Hafez is the prince of Persian lyric poetry. He believed that man's selfishness is responsible for all his sufferings. Thus, egoism is the bondage from which one has to be liberated. What Hafez saw in his days was selfishness, misery, war, and bloodshed. Yet, like alchemy, he transformed these inputs into golden melodies and spiritual taverns of celestial wine. Be a passionate pilgrim of the pass of love, and behold what blessings shall come thy way in this journey.
The calm and prosperity which provided the fertile ground for the development of such works of art was abruptly shaken by the brutal forces of Genghis Khan, known as the Mongols, followed by Tamerlane.
In the 13th and 14th century, just like the strong winds from the east, two invasions almost destroyed the nation. But like a cypress tree, which bends to the ground in the wind and then returns, so did Iran and its culture.
When you look at history of Iran, and suddenly you realize that constantly there were invaders coming. From the west, it was Alexander the Great and the Arabs. From the east, it were the Turks and the Mongols. You realize that Iran shouldn't have existed on the map of history for centuries, for millennia. It should have been wiped out completely because it is on the crossroad of all the civilizations and the battlefield for many armies. But Iran is still alive and kicking and well. How is it possible? All those invaders who came on the Iranian plateau they were so attracted to Iranian way of life, to Iranian civilization, to the beauty of music, the beauty of poetry, the beauty of miniature, the beauty of Persian cuisine, that within a very short period, they tried and wanted to become Iranian, Persians.
As these coins testify, the Mongols gradually turned to Islam, which became the official religion of their ruling dynasty, known as the Ilkhanids. They, like the Seljuks, found out that they cannot rule without the help of Iranian ministers or viziers. The northwestern Iranian city of Tabriz was chosen as their capital. Marco Polo, who had visited Tabriz at that time, thus describes it.
A great city surrounded by beautiful and pleasant gardens. It is excellently situated so that goods are brought to here from many regions. Latin merchants, especially Genoese, go there to buy the goods that come from foreign lands.
Here, the famous Iranian vizier Rashiduddin Hamadani created an entire suburb called Rabi Rashidi, employing within it scholars, doctors and craftsmen. Rashiduddin's Foundation Act for this city of science reveals that it was well planned and included 24 caravanserai or inns, 1,500 shops, 30,000 houses, and textile and paper manufacturing workshops. A special zone was allotted to housing scientists and physicians invited from across the world to work at Rabi Rashidi's International Hospital.
Beginning in the 13th century, colorful tile decoration becomes very prominent in the decoration of palaces in Iran. It becomes kind of a decorative sheath for the interior of buildings.
This could be seen at Sultaniye, the landmark of the new Ilkhanid king, Sultan Muhammad's capital city. Now in ruins, it might have looked like this when it was intact. Perhaps the boldest innovation of this building is the corona of 8 minarets. André Godard thus described it.
The blue dome, vivid and gleaming with its brilliant crown of minarets, seems to float in the sky. Here is a dome with a span of 80 feet, built solely of bricks, which stands simply by virtue of a perfectly conceived and constructed profile.
According to studies by an Italian team headed by Professor Piero San Paolesi from the University of Florence, the plan and structure of the Great Dome at Sultaniye has had a direct impact on the design and construction of the Church of Santa Maria del Fiore in the city of Florence. After the second wave of invasion by Tamerlane and the power struggle which followed by his successors, the country was divided between different sultans and petty kings. it was now the right time for the emergence of a unified Iran. At the beginning of the 16th century, the semi-nomadic Turkmen Shia tribes of Anatolia and northwestern Iran, with their charismatic leader Ismail the Safavid, gradually gained control over Iran. Subsequently, the extraordinary revival of Iranian civilization took shape, and an invigorating culture flourished. The most distinguished of the Safavid rulers was Shah Abbas, who came to the throne in 1587. During his rule, an Englishman, Sir Robert Shirley, trained the Safavid army in the use of artillery. With this new force, Shah Abbas drove back the Uzbeks in the northeast and the Ottomans in the northwest. The Safavid rule was manifested by two important developments. First, the re-emergence of a nation-state as the core of an empire. Second, the consolidation of Shi'i Islam as the national religion of the country.
Neither Sunnism nor Shiism was invented by the Persians, as some Orientalists have claimed. They are already to be seen even in the lives of the Prophet, when the Prophet himself referred to certain people as Shi'at al-Ali. There were people whom the Prophet recognized as sort of the party of Ali, even during his own lifetime. Certain places, like the city of Qom, like Sabzavar, places are from the very beginning centers of Shiism. And especially when the Ahlul Bayt, many of them migrated to Iran as a result of the persecutions under the Umayyads in Iraq, and also the early Abbasid period, of course, culminating with the journey of the 8th Shiite Imam, Imam Rida alayhi salam, to Khorasan, where he is now buried.
For political and economic considerations, Shah Abbas relocated his capital from Kazvin to Isfahan in the heartland of the Iranian plateau and by the Zayande Rud, or the life-giving river.
I'm always struck when I go to Isfahan by a sense of the magic of the place. I think it's an architecture that has a wonderful capacity for theatricality, for orchestrating climaxes. Think of these huge surfaces which are smoothed out so that they can act as picture galleries for separate panels of tile decoration. You are meant to look at that, to walk from panel to panel, to drink them in, to contemplate them. I think that's the great strength of Safavid architecture.
Under the Safavids, the textile industry flourished and became a key factor in establishing economic prosperity. The paintings on the Chehil Sotun, or 40 columns pavilion, not only depict the musical instruments of the period, they also serve as a reference to the clothing and textiles of the era.
Safavid textiles are one of the truly great developments in Iranian art over the centuries, and we are talking about, of course, an art tradition of extraordinary ambition and achievement over millennia, not just a few centuries, but over millennia. So it's something that we have to take, I think, a great humility when we look at the accomplishments of this artistic tradition.
The silk trade was boosted by the Armenian craftsmen and merchants transferred from Julfa in Azerbaijan to a suburb of Isfahan named the New Julfa. Relative religious tolerance, especially for Christians, was a feature of the Safavid rule. Accordingly, during the reign of the Safavid kings, 14 churches, including the famous Vank Cathedral, were built in Isfahan. This was accentuated in Jean Chardin's writings.
Chardin, who was in Iran from the 1660s, analyzed everything very carefully. At that time, Europe was witnessing a long-standing religious strife among Catholics and Protestants. And since Chardin himself was a Protestant, one major topic in his book of travels was freedom of religion, which he'd found in Iran of the Safavid era. And the root and origin of the idea of religious tolerance in 18th century France was in fact inspired by Chardin's book of travels.
Following the footsteps of Cyrus the Great, Shah Abbas devised the Chahabak Promenade. This 4-kilometer-long public park, the longest in Iranian architectural history, with sequences of gardens, monumental balconies, and a canal at the center for conducting water through ornamented pools, overwhelmed everyone. At the very end of the 17th century, the Iranian artists and craftsmen succeeded in re-establishing Iran's long-lasting tradition with beautification of the surrounding world.
In terms of shapes, I would say without hesitating that no country in the world has anything like remotely the diversity and number of shapes that were created in the Iranian world from 2000 BC down to the 19th century. And you can see how they developed continuously.
The creators of this illuminating array of beauty are amongst the world's greatest artists who splendidly guide us towards the source of all beauty, and in the words of Rumi, toward that land of peace where questionings cease. My soul turned its face to that happy place, the land of peace where questionings cease. The mystery that till now from me 1,000 veils concealed, my soul revealed.
بگشا نقاب از رخ که رخ تو هست فرخ. آن سوی دروازه زمان تمدنی غرور آفرین با میراثی 7000 ساله رخ می نماید. گاهواره تمدن، اولین امپراتوری جهانی با پیام انسانی. 4 راه تمدن‌ها. دنیایی از آثار و گوهرهای هنری. سرزمینی مملو از عجایب معماری که برای اولین بار بازآفرینی شده. هفت رخ فرخ ایران. اولین نقطه در ایران که خورشید تمدن آغاز تابیدن نمود، دشت حاصلخیز خوزستان بود که همپای بین النهرین گاهواره اصلی تمدن بشری محسوب می شود.
چوغامیش، این تپه باستانی که پشت سر من می بینی، یکی از مهمترین مراکز باستانی خوزستان. این تپه در 6800 پیش از میلاد توسط کشاورزان اولیه مسکونی شد و در هزاره چهارم به شهر بزرگی تبدیل شد که با نهادهای حکومتی اداره می شد.
از جمله یافته‌های بسیار مهم باستانشناسان در چغامیش تعدادی نقش مهر بر روی گوی‌های گلی است که تصویر چند نوع بنای شهری را نشان می‌دهد. این نقش‌ها مبنایی برای بازسازی گرافیکی چغامیش در هزاره چهارم پیش از میلاد شد.
این شهر اولیه در هزاره چهارم پیش از میلاد دارای نقشه شهرسازی بود که قسمت‌های اداری و قسمت‌های مسکونی و کارگاهی اونو از هم جدا می‌کرد. خیابان‌ها، کوچه‌های این شهر به راحتی با هم در ارتباط بودند و جالبه که بدونیم شهر دارای فاضلابی بود که هم در روی زمین و هم در زیر زمین جاری بود.
شهرنشینی یا آغاز تمدن دومین انقلاب بزرگ در فرهنگ بشری است و شهر شوش در زمره آن مراکز باستانی است که ساکنانش اولین قدم‌ها را برای رسیدن به شهرنشینی برداشتند.
به نظر من سرزمین شوش خاستگاه و محل پیدایش پدیده‌ای در جهان بوده که اونو انقلاب شهرنشینی مینامیم، در حالی که بخش‌هایی از جهان در دوران پیش از تاریخ به سر می‌برد. برای اولین بار ایلامی‌ها وارد عرصه تاریخ شدند و همزمان با سومری‌ها زندگی شهرنشینی را بنیان نهادند. آغاز شهرنشینی با پیدایش حکومتی مقتدر توأم بوده. سرزمین ایلام شامل انشان یا همان فارس امروزی و شوش یا خوزستان امروزی بود.
تقریباً تمام فنونی که جوامع بشری را به طوری بی سابقه دستخوش تحولات عظیم نمود، حاصل انقلاب شهرنشینی در شوش و شهرهای جنوبی بین النهرین بود. همچون نوآوری در معماری، شکلگیری علم هندسه و ذوب فلزات، اختراع چرخ و حتی ساخت اسباب بازی. و بالاخره تولید انبوه ظروف سفالین. با توسعه فعالیت‌های اقتصادی، نیاز به ثبت و ضبط اطلاعات مربوط به این معاملات شدت بیشتری یافت و این نیاز نهایتاً به تحول خط انجام یافت. تحول خط یا نگارش مرز میان تاریخ و پیش از تاریخ به حساب می آید و بدین ترتیب انسان وارد دوران تاریخی شد. این پیشرفت‌های عظیم در تمدن بشری باعث شد تا در قرن 13 پیش از میلاد ایلام در زمان مقتدرترین پادشاه خود یعنی اونتاش ناپیریشا به اوج شکوفایی اقتصادی و فرهنگی برسد. در متون تاریخی این پادشاه پایه‌گذار شهر مقدسی در کرانه رود دز معرفی شده است. شهر اونتاش که در زبان محلی آن را چغازنبیل می‌خوانند. زیگوراتی با شکوه در ابعاد 100 متر در 100 متر در مرکز این شهر مذهبی واقع شده بود. این زیگورات بیمانند شامل سکوهای 5 طبقه بوده که بلندی آن به 50 متر می رسیده است. در این مکان پیشوایان مذهبی مراسم آیینی را به جا می آوردند و همزمان آداب قربانی بر سکوهای ویژه‌ای اجرا می شد. ایلامیان در زمینه ریختگری اجسام حجیم نیز به پیشرفت‌های چشمگیری نائل شده بودند. تندیس 1750 کیلوگرمی همسر پادشاه ایلام ناپیراسو که حتی در مصر و بابل نظیر نداشته، احتمالاً قبل از صدمه دیدن چنین حالتی داشته است. در هزاره اول پیش از میلاد فن ذوب فلزات و ساخت پیکره به روش قالب‌سازی و ریختگری در میان قبایلی که به تازگی در کوهپایه‌های زاگرس در لرستان مأوا گزیده بودند پیشرفت چشمگیری کرد.
حیرت آور بودن این مجموعه به این دلیل که این اشیا بسیار بی‌نظیر و در عین حال فوق‌العاده زنده هستند. برای ساختن هر کدام از این مفرق‌های لرستان اول یک نمونه مومی می ساختن، بعد دور اون با گل می پوشوندن تا قالب درست بشه. قالب گلی رو حرارت می دادن تا هم سفت بشه، هم موم داخلش آب بشه. بعد مفرق مذاب رو داخل قالب می ریختن. پس می بینیم که کارهای فلزی لرستان کاملا منحصر به فردن.
تمدن ایلام هم مانند هر تمدن دیگری اوج گرفت و سپس افول کرد. ضربه کاری زمانی وارد آمد که در حوالی سال 650 پیش از میلاد آشوربانیپال پادشاه آشور به شهر شوش و دیگر شهرهای ایلام حمله کرد. آشوریان هم اندکی بعد مورد هجوم نیروهای جوان و توانمند مادی قرار گرفتند و زمینه برای ایجاد یک امپراتوری عظیم جهانی فراهم شد که امپراتوری هخامنشی نام گرفت. مادها و پارسها جزو مهاجران آریایی بودند که از سرزمین‌های شمالی خود را به فلات ایران رسانده و در آنجا سکونت گزیدند. آنان به لهجه‌هایی از زبان هندو-اروپایی سخن می‌گفتند که نیای زبان فارسی امروزین محسوب می‌شود. از راهآورد این مهاجرت و در جای جای مسیر حرکت این اقوام ایرانی نمونه‌های شاخص هنر و صنایع دستیشان را می‌توان مشاهده کرد.